Hi, welcome to episode 34 of Talk About the Passion, Words I Manifest. I'm your host, Christian Campagna. I'm going to make this intro quick today as I'm currently on vacation in beautiful Southern California, soon to be in beautiful Central Coast, California, and eventually the beautiful Bay Area of California. And that's a lot of beautiful stuff, I know, for this sort of dark, cold time of year. I've only been here a few days and I went pretty hard buying records yesterday. 5 shops I never stepped into in the San Diego area. I found a lot of good stuff, including a ton of stuff from Boston that I couldn't find there, but I found out here. And I'm going to have to ship all this stuff back. Enough about me and my vacation exploits. My guest today is Brian Coleman. Brian is a Boston area author who has written a number of books, including Rakim Told Me, Check the Technique, Volume 1 and Volume 2. And of course, his newest book, Buy Me Boston, which just came out. We get into all these books in this conversation, and Brian talks a lot about his interview process with some of the artists he's had to interview for, doing research on the hip-hop records he covers. As well as, what it's like to sort of get into the head of some of these artists and see how they arrived at that, finished product that we all love, the album. And, these books too are like more of an homage to the art of just the album, which I think is kind of lost nowadays. And we talk a little bit about that. These 3 books, however, though, if you're a hip hop fan, they're essential reads. And as Brian explains in the episode, these books aren't for people just getting into hip hop. They're definitely written for people like me who, just want more information on hip-hop artists and more specifically the records that each chapter covers. So, he gets pretty deep into that stuff, and you should definitely check all those books out. And he refers to those books as invisible liner notes, which is pretty cool. He has an encyclopedic knowledge of hip-hop music, and now with this new book, Buy Me Boston, he shows us Boston as how a lot of us grew up around here. Remember it, via advertisements. Buy Me Boston is a great collection of ads from a bygone era that is in all of our DNA. Well, people who grew up are in the Boston area in the 60s, 70s, 80s. And Brian has an event coming up this weekend for that book, this weekend being the second weekend of November 2018. Obviously, if you're listening to this after the weekend of that, there's no Buy Me Boston event at the Brattle this weekend. But Brian talks extensively about it, and I will I'll link to it in my social media outlets. It looks like a pretty amazing event, and I'm unfortunately still going to be away when that takes place. So, but you should definitely check it out if you're from the area, and check that book out. I'm on social media at Facebook and Instagram. Search for Talk About the Passion podcast, and you should be able to find me there. Or you can also hear this podcast on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. If you or someone you know would like to be on this podcast, please get in touch, and we can set something up. And yeah, that's it. So, episode 34. Words I Manifest, Brian Coleman. Check it out, and thanks for listening. So I'm here with my friend Brian Coleman, and how you doing today, man?
I'm good. How are you?
Good, very good. And
I'm glad to be on.
Yeah,
we've been talking about this for a while. So.
Yeah. Our mutual friend Zach Lazar. Who's kind of a character.
You can say that. What's up, Zach?
Set us up, and so I'm glad you came out to do this.
Yeah,
and,
no, it's wonderful to be here, seaside.
So where did you grow up, Brian?
I grew up all over the Northeast, not in one place. I've lived in Boston or in Massachusetts longer than anywhere else in my life, but I lived in central New Jersey, northern New Jersey, upstate New York, like Rochester. I won't really generally admit it, but I lived in Connecticut for 2 years, but I don't want to talk about that. Yeah. And so I've been in Boston since '88, and I came there to go to Boston College, and I've been there ever since. So I'm not a born and bred
Right.
Bostonian, but
Yeah.
as you can probably tell from my accent, but I consider myself that's my adopted town for sure. I've lived there longer than anywhere else.
Yeah.
That's where my affinity kind of lies. I mean, I went to basically elementary school in Acton, so that was my first kind of going into Red Sox games, going to the North End, going to the No Name and stuff like that. So I still have that. That would be my rosebud kind of thing. If I went back, I would think back to, because I Acton was great. I loved it there. But my family just moved around a bunch. So, yeah.
And so how did you, when you were younger, how did you get into music or film and writing and that kind of stuff?
I mean, it's a good question. I mean, I think I was pretty serious about music, at least in my mind, fairly early on. It wasn't just entertainment to me. It wasn't just in the background. Like I would say by the time I was in just before my teens, I was not exactly, a music authority in any way, sense, or form. But I think I kind of realized that it was something I paid attention to. It wasn't just something that floated by in the background. I can remember when I was a kid, when I was probably 7 or 8, I had a little Fisher-Price record player thing, and I had some 45s, and I would just listen to them over and over. I had like the Spinners' Rubber Band Man was one of them. Hughes Corporation, Rock the Boat. Some rocks. I had Bill Haley and the Comets, Rock Around the Clock.
Oh, yeah. Was that because
maybe that was a happy day? I would have guessed. I can't remember actually how I obtained those 45s, like a yard sale, or if someone gave them to me, or if I actually bought them. But I definitely remember that. I got much more serious about it in early high school. I was in central New Jersey. And I don't know, it just kind of was always there, and it was just growing in me as something I was just really interested in and engaged with. And I mean, I think once, I don't remember how I got to my first punk show, which was, I think, in 1985 at City Gardens. So City Gardens in Trenton, which is a fairly infamous punk club, became my second home, really, in high school in the mid 80s. And it was incredible. I'd never experienced anything like it, clearly. But I also felt an almost instant affinity for it, because it was just this, it was a place where kind of outcasts could not be all outcasty, you could kind of get together and feel like, even though you were all freaks and all weird and no one necessarily looked like everyone else, there was this affinity. Because no one else really in my high school, it's not like I was following anyone around, or I wanted to be like this person or anything like that. So I just kind of found my way into it. And you just, the going to your first hardcore show, I think the first show I went, I'd have to look at my little list of shows that I used to write down, but I think it was GBH, Corrosion of Conformity, maybe DRI. I mean, it was a pretty goddamn good lineup, considering that I didn't know who the bands were when I got there. That's the thing. I think a friend of mine who was maybe a year or two older may have heard that was the place to go. And that was it. I mean, once you see that, you see a pit, and you see the intensity, and you see... I think the engagement, you see that the audience isn't there to sit down, and do like jazz snaps and stuff like that. Like, this is no holds barred. This is, you're in it, you're in the shit, so to speak. And it was incredible. And so I didn't exclusively listen to hardcore. I was mentioning to you before off mic that, like, I was really into The Alarm, you know, like I was drawn to them, I think, because there's always, if you're not an Alarm fan, you don't really understand the thing about U2 and The Alarm. And it was like this battle, you know, it was like one or the other. It was like, fuck you two, man. You can't, So I kind of was the Team Alarm, and because they were like the underdogs.
Yeah.
You two were like the big stars,
Right.
and the Alarm were these guys from they were Welsh, right?
I think so, yeah.
And they were very political. They were very engaged. So I got into that too. So it wasn't all hardcore,
Right.
but I think I drifted to hardcore groups like Circle Jerks. The Descendants, I would say, were probably my number one favorites for many, many different reasons.
Yeah.
But 7 Seconds, I think, were close behind them. It was great. It was amazing. I mean, and City Gardens was a really insane place. I mean, as any punk club is, you know, Gallery East or any
Right.
of these kind of places like that. But you kind of figured out that if you played enough by the rules, that the rules were different rules than living in quote unquote normal society.
Right.
But as long as you didn't act like too much of a dick, as long as you didn't think you were too tough, as long as you didn't whatever, as long as you didn't step out of line, because I think looking back, the beauty of it was that if you stepped out of line, you get put back in line.
And people policed it. It didn't have to
but
be
it wasn't
security.
but it was there, I think. And looking back, it's interesting because now this is 30 years looking back. It wasn't even, because from the outside, if you're uninitiated and you don't really understand, you think some things like punching someone else or knocking someone else down in the pit is an aggressive act and is an act of, you know, fuck you, I'm going to kick your ass, but it really wasn't. And there was that whole thing of you get knocked down and other people pick you up.
Right.
And it was really interesting. So it was self-policed, but and it was kind of real, but it wasn't even angry. So like we all saved a lot of our, I guess, anger or angst or whatever you want to call it for everyone else in the world. And like when we were in there, and it's the same thing in any place like that in Boston, whatever that was. The Channel or Bunratty's or whatever, was the same thing. So that was kind of the beauty. Is so when I came up to Boston in '88, I went from CBGB's and City Gardens right into that scene, into the Channel and the Rat, and it was I understood it. It was like speaking the same language. It was like going from one French-speaking country to another French-speaking country, and it was a little different, a little more violent up here. The Slapshot shows were no joke. Like even CB's wasn't. Well, there was nothing like a Slapshot show at Bunratty's, like a matinee or the Channel. It was some pretty violent shit. And you had to kind of adapt, but you could still, you understood the language. And that was kind of the beauty of it. So hardcore travels. It travels across state and international borders.
Yeah, of course, And in that era too, 88, 89 is sort of when it started switching over to a little where, you know, bands like Slaughter Shack started happening, and Seika, and sort of the bands that weren't afraid to go metal or you know, birthday party influence, that kind of stuff.
I think it was interesting in the All Ages Hardcore movie. I don't even remember who the hell said it, but they were talking about groups like SSD, and they were like, I mean, we basically learned to play our instruments.
Exactly.
And once you learn to play your instrument, you start making metal. And
it's
that simple. It wasn't like we always wanted to be Iron Maiden. It was like we just were better. We actually knew more than one chord. So we could, we could kind
guitar
of move.
solos actually.
And I always find that interesting. That whole thing where you want the band that you love to stay the same forever, even 10 years on. You want them to sound like they did 10 years ago, and the band doesn't want that. So sometimes the fans stay, but a lot of times they don't. And I feel that way too. Like sometimes you'll go see a band, and the worst thing that a band can do in a reunion is like, oh, we've got a new album coming out, and you're like, fuck.
I know, right?
Sometimes it works out. I mean, Proletariat are back, and they still sound as amazing as they ever did. Mission to Burma, I think, sounded as good when they came back.
Yeah. There's exceptions.
There are definitely
Yeah.
exceptions, but they are exceptions.
Yeah,
Usually it's like, oh God, and I won't name any other names of the negative on that one. But so I think no matter what I do, I always still see through the lens of my earliest engagement with music, beyond being a fan, which was going to those hardcore shows. And I still demand that feeling out of new music I listen to. Like if it doesn't engage me like that, if it doesn't punch you in the chest, then it's like, I mean, I got a lot of old stuff to listen to.
So, right. Yeah. Now, how did you get into writing? Were you doing that as a teenager, or? No,
it's interesting. My writing career, I always call it accidental. I mean, it wasn't. When I was younger, I wrote, as English class, and wrote kind of like dumb little short stories and stuff. But I never considered myself a writer, and nor did I want to be a writer. Right. It really kind of. I knew I was half decent as a writer, but even yet I didn't ever say, even as I got into my 20s, like I want to be a writer. And I certainly didn't go to journalism school. I wasn't on the school paper. I wasn't doing any of that. So I really think what happened, and yet again, everything I do is through this kind of punk hardcore lens, is I was just kind of sick of the way that things were in the Boston media. Yeah. And I said, there's so many good bands, and all of these idiots are not writing about any of it. They're just saying, oh, Aerosmith is back. And it's like, oh my God, are you kidding me? Yeah. So I just said, I'm just going to write this because I think that it's ridiculous that no one else is. Yeah. And this carries forward to the books I've put out, is like, it's not going to be great and it's not going to be perfect, but at least it's out there. At least I'm making an effort.
You're documenting this stuff.
Yeah, but it's kind of more, to me, it's interesting. Like, there are very few writers in my own history of reading, especially journalism, that I don't necessarily read reviews or features in like music magazines for the actual article. Right. I use it for information because, and this is my own character as a person, is I just don't really give that much of a shit what other people think. Right. That's really what it boils down to. I can say that's well written, or oh, that's kind of insightful. Yeah. But in reality, I'm like, just tell me it's out and give me a little bit of context, and I'll figure it out from there. Yeah. And that was a lot more difficult, as you know, in the 80s and 90s, in that you couldn't just jump on YouTube and say, oh, I can listen to 20 songs and get a primer of this band in a half hour. Yeah. I have plenty of stories of hearing a band like on the radio or something like that, but missing the segue where they said who it was. Yeah. And it would drive me absolutely insane, because this band can change my life, but I don't even know who the hell they are. So this actually happened most notably in my own career with Fishbone, who were definitely in my top 5 bands of all time. Yeah. But for a year, I didn't know who the hell they were. Yeah. I had taped at the very tail end of a video of the Modern Industry. Yeah. And it didn't say who it was. Like at MTV, I could be wrong, but I think in those days, in the 80s, they only listed the band and the album at the beginning. Right. And not at the end, or maybe it was on another channel and it wasn't on MTV. But for whatever reason, I was like, holy shit, who is this? Yeah. But I couldn't find out who they were. Yeah. And so that day of revelation, when I finally was like, oh my God, that's them, was incredible, because it was like I'd been living with this, for so long. And it was just...
Where did you hear it eventually, and then discover that it was Fishbone?
That's another good question. I wonder, I may have, because I had it on a VHS, so maybe I made a tape of it. Yeah. Because I used to shop at the Princeton Record Exchange. That's a good question.
You said Modern Industry.
Well, no, I don't even think I knew the title. I think I just said, do you know, I would go, it was almost like, I would go up to people like I felt like I was going up to people on the street, like, can you help me, please,
Right,
sir?
yeah,
You know, as if someone's chasing you in
Yeah,
a horror
exactly.
movie, or, you know, whatever, you just got robbed, and,
Right.
you know, so it was this whole, it seemed much more intense than of course it was, but, so that may have been how I did it.
Right.
Yeah, but it was a different time, and it was I think that's a good thing. I think it's good to not have instant gratification. I really still don't believe is really that good of a thing most of the time.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's okay.
Right.
I can't say I don't partake in certain things that have instant gratification
Yeah.
in them, but I think generally I avoid them on
Yeah.
purpose, because I do think that there is a beauty of discovering things on your own.
Yeah.
So I guess that kind of leads back to, as a writer, maybe the good thing is I didn't have anyone that I was going to copy, because I didn't really pay a ton of attention. There were a couple writers I liked, but even the classics, even like Lester Bangs, I didn't know who the hell Lester Bangs was in my 20s even. And once I did, I was kind of like, this, I appreciated him.
Right.
I never would have read him, and I definitely don't think I ever would have wanted to hang out with him. But I still respect him, because he was just an original for sure. So anyways, I think I started writing because there were groups. I remember specifically like the Roots.
Yeah.
I mean, my whole journey into being a hip hop fan is a whole other thing, but
I was going to actually go back to that.
I mean, it would make a lot of sense, certainly, and I love that. But so the Roots were a good example. In like 94, early 95, I was like, oh my God, I had discovered them however I discovered them.
Right.
And nobody was talking about the Roots, and no one was writing about them. And I was like, what the hell is going on? Like, are you people all deaf?
Right.
And, you're talking about, Notorious B.I.G. and all this stuff. Like, what about the Roots?
Right.
So I went to Tristram Lozaw, still a good friend of mine, and he was the editor of Boston Rock. And I said, if I do a column, will you run it? I didn't say, will you pay me? Because that was probably out of the question no matter what. But I didn't care. So, and he was like, sure. So I did that, and I started writing a column. And I'm almost positive my first column must have had the Roots in it. But there were like reissue. I remember there was like a Last Poets record had come out, and I reviewed that. And that's kind of where I started. I started in that zone. I never really wrote about hardcore or even rock. I kind of, not because obviously I didn't listen to it and I didn't love it, but more early on, I kind of got in that lane in hip hop, kind of funk, soul. Also, I was doing a radio show at the time on WZBC.
Oh, okay.
And I was doing a funk show and like an old school hip hop show. So that's just where my head was at anyways. And that, to be honest, that's where I was, quote unquote, more on the cutting edge of what was coming out, because promos were coming into the station. And so I had this early access to it. So, but it wasn't that, I couldn't have written about rock stuff, but I just started in hip hop and just kind of stayed there.
Yeah. And going back into the 80s, that's when you first got into hip hop. And when did you first hear that?
So at the same time, I was going to all the hardcore shows in New Jersey. A friend of mine must have told me about this radio show. And so DJ Red Alert was on the weekends on Kiss 98 in New York. And it was the same kind of thing as going to that first hardcore show. When I first heard, I had listened to like Run DMC, to the Fat Boys because they were on MTV. But I didn't really, that was just pop music to me. It wasn't like I said, oh, this is hip hop and it's different and it's a different culture and this is how it's produced differently and blah, blah. Like, obviously I was 13. I was like, oh, I love the Fat Boys. So, so then there was the second kind of exposure to it, which was through Red Alert. And this is probably like 86, 85, definitely 86, 87. and it just blew my mind. It was that it had that same kind of rawness that I loved in hardcore and punk stuff.
Right.
Clearly, it was very different stylistically in a lot of different ways, but to me, the only thing I ever wanted out of music was just kind of to give me something I haven't heard before, to kind of punch me a little bit and have me look in a different direction and kind of you have that first experience where you hear something and it just opens a whole new kind of world, and you're like, holy shit, so there's a whole genre, there's this whole world out there that I didn't even know existed. You know, it's like finding a new planet or a new country or something like that.
Right.
And you're just like, oh my God. So I dove into that at the same time, but it's just, but it was mostly through Red Alert. Interestingly, bands would play. This is the funny thing. So Trenton, for those who don't know geographically, is about almost exactly equidistant between New York and Philadelphia.
Right.
It's about an hour from each.
Okay.
And so that's where City Gardens was. I was in West Windsor outside of Trenton, in Princeton. And so bands from New York would play at City Gardens, hip-hop groups. It wasn't just a punk club. It was just like the Channel would book hip-hop shows too. But the funny thing was, so you'd go to see 5 bands on a hardcore bill and it'd be $4 or $6.
Yeah.
The hip hop shows are always like 15, you know?
Yeah.
Which is kind of funny because usually it was just like 2 people on stage, but they just had higher ticket prices and I just didn't have the money. And I was like, so Public Enemy or Schoolie D would play and, I just would be like, I'm not paying $15. Who the hell pays $15 to go to a show?
Right.
So, but it was pretty exorbitant for City Gardens. That was a lot of money to pay for a show.
Yeah.
So I wanted to go to those shows, but I just didn't.
Yeah.
So I kind of was parallel pathing really from then on out with, but not just hardcore and hip hop. I also started, because hip hop, a lot of people have the same path, which is you start to realize like, oh shit, so who's Sly and the Family Stone?
Right,
and,
you can work backwards.
And to get much deeper, like who's Chuck Brown and the Soul Searchers, and who's, all the people who are sampled.
Right.
And you start to then listen to the sources. And so then I started getting into funk stuff and African music and a lot of electronic stuff, craft work, and started expanding. So I think all throughout, I've really never stopped listening to either one of the to hardcore or hip hop. My listening habits might change, but it's just interesting that I've never really written about punk stuff. I think partially because I always also felt that there were enough people writing about punk stuff that it's like I would just be another fish in the pond. Whereas in hip hop, the stuff that I was covering when I was starting to write about it, I always consciously chose the stuff that most people didn't care about, which is basically anything that's unpopular.
Right.
So it ended up being old school stuff. So when everyone was trying to write about Jay-Z and Mace and, whoever, all the big people who were out, I was always like, all right, I'll take everyone else. So whoever was coming up, Jurassic 5 or, Kool Keith and stuff like that, there was really no competition. So I was like, that's a hell of a lot more interesting to me than all this shit on Bad Boy. So, throw it all at me. And then like DJ stuff, when the turntablist movement became big in the mid and late 90s, I was kind of more of a specialist in there. So that's just, I never really thought I was going to be a writer. I'm not a bad writer, but I was never trained, and I was never, I have friends who are professional journalists and they're amazing. And it kind of puts me in a little bit of awe because I just don't have that impulse. Like I'm not the guy who has, the pencil in his ear and the notepad and I'm taking down stuff. Like I just always done it more as a fan.
Yeah. And I see that in the books. I mean, when you're saying that though, I mean, when I look at the hip hop books, it seems like tons of work goes into that. So I think you're being humble here a little bit.
Well, I mean, the one thing I'll say is I'm a really good interviewer.
Yeah.
As
definitely.
a writer, I'm fine, and I have my moments, but my books aren't about
It's definitely a fan writing. It's not just someone going, "Hey, let's."
Well, like you read like Touré or something like that, and it's like that's very nice and flowery, but he's also just that's good for bedtime, so it puts you to sleep. So, so it's kind of like I would much rather have the facts presented, and just my whole thing has always been. And I don't even know if I can really point to an exact example of why, but it's always been to kind of generally stay out of the way. Because there are a lot of writers, I mentioned Lester Bangs earlier, there are certainly a lot of hip-hop writers too who kind of put themselves in the article, like they're part of the show. Right. And I've never done that, and I will never do that because I don't really believe in that approach. Yeah. I've never actually liked it, reading it, and some people do, and that's fine. But my thing has always been to kind of present everything in a very sober kind of way and let the artists stay in the spotlight. Yeah. So it worked out that way. But and I like interviewing. It takes a while. Sometimes when I talk to younger writers, if anyone ever approaches me and wants advice or whatever. It's always the important thing is to be a good interviewer, and you will not be a good interviewer when you begin, no matter how much you prepare and how many courses you take. Yeah. And start with someone who doesn't mean shit. Don't start. One of my earliest interviews was with Chuck D, which is not smart. Like I shouldn't have done that, because I should have started on a much lower level, but that was presented to me, and how am I going to say no to that? Yeah, of course. So I consider myself a much better interviewer than I am a writer. Okay. For whatever that's worth. Yeah.
And so was the first book you put out the Rakim Told Me book?
Yes. So at a certain point, I was doing a lot of magazine writing. Right. And for like XXL, Herb, CMJ, locally for the Herald, the Phoenix. And then I don't know if every writer comes to that conclusion. I guess they don't, because there are a lot of people who write for magazines and newspapers forever. Right. Maybe not now, but that's not their choice. Right, They're being forced out of that world. But I just got kind of tired with it. I think my whole thing is I get bored really easily, and I hate doing the same thing over and over again. Right. So at a certain point, I was kind of like, maybe books would be good, because, you write an article and you're proud of it and you're glad, and then next month, then it's in the trash pile and it's gone. And so there had been X number of books in the music world that had always been important to me, and it kind of struck me that, what if I did one of those? What if now it's not going to be as good as David Toop or Stephen Hager, or some of these people who I consider to be kind of giants, Nelson George, etc. But I can at least make an attempt, and I can throw something out there that has a little bit more permanence to it, that puts more of a stake in the ground, and is not going to be this thing that's old news in a week or a month. Right. And so I put together this book called Rakim Told Me, that was, in effect, it was really just director's cut versions of pieces I had already done. Right. So I would interview KRS-One for 3 hours, and it was the most incredible interview. And oh my God, he told me the craziest shit. Right. And then the editor would say, "Great, give me 600 words," right. And I'd be like, "God damn it!" Right. And it was like, what I've said before, is like writing blue balls, where you're just like, I have so much more stuff I want to say, and they're just not letting me say it. And this is bullshit. Right. So that was my response, was like, I'm going to do this book, and not only am I going to put it out, but I'm going to put it out myself. Right. So no one can tell me what the hell I have to see. As me being very petulant, which I want to do. And so self-publishing works quite nicely for that kind of an approach. Yeah. And yeah, but I think so with Rakim Told Me, it was really just, it was people had seen slices of what was in that with other pieces I had done. But this was the way I wanted them presented. And I had the ability to do that. So pieces that normally were 600, 800 words now became 3,000 words, 4,000 words. And to me, that was amazing because it was like, finally, I can share these the way I want them to be shared. Now, keep in mind, when you put out a self-published book, or even if you put out a book on a major, it's a lot different than when you do something in a huge publication, The Source or XXL. Everyone has their eyes on that, and you know, my column was always way in the back next to the booty ads and stuff like that. But still, people be, oh, I saw that, da da da. And like with a book, you don't get that generally. I mean, you have to work towards that, where you have to carve out your own distribution, your own exposure. That's a whole other thing. But yeah, so the first one I put out, it was in 2005, and it was great. I mean, it was, I went into it just saying, would I buy this book? Like, if I wasn't involved with it, is this something I would buy? And I was just like, hell yes, I would buy this, definitely. And so it's like, all right, well, maybe there are another 1,000 or 2,000 people in the world who feel the same way. And I think there are. And I'm like, it might take me 10 years to sell off this, you know, batch of 2,000 I just printed up. But who cares? Like, at least I did it. And this is the only thing I'll ever put out. And good. At least I can't be on my deathbed like, I wish I put out a book, you know. So I did it, and hopefully I won't die next year and all that. So, and it kind of sold like gangbusters, relatively speaking. So I had burned through that first printing of 2,000 in definitely less than a year, which was amazing. And I sold it in record stores, not in bookstores. Bookstores bookstores have never really messed with me. And I don't really mess with them either. And I don't care, because I don't really need them. Like, if any of them want to come on board, great, but I'm not going to kiss their ass, because a book, I've said this many times before, like a book in a record store stands out.
Oh, of course.
A book in a bookstore, okay. There's like 50,000 more of these, but whatever. So that was kind of my approach. And then it grew into an editor at Random House, actually called Villard. It was like a division of Random House. Found Rakim Told Me and liked it and reached out. And then that was kind of hilarious to me. I was kind of like, it was great though, but this is what I also tell people, like young people who want to go through the process of doing a book proposal and basically begging these major publishing houses who don't know what the hell is going to sell, and half of them don't give a shit. Like they want their one blockbuster book, and then they don't care about the rest of the catalog. And it's a really shitty thing to go through, and it's very much a direct comparison towards being a musician being on a major label. It's the exact same thing. So if you can put it out yourself, like, do it. And when I did the first book, when I did Rakim Told Me, this whole kind of print on demand thing wasn't a thing. So that I would have done that. But that wasn't a thing. The internet was not really as much. You couldn't really just put out your own blog and do or your Instagram, blah, blah, blah. So you had to print them up. Now you have all these options. It's a really, anyone who's put out their own album before, their own single, and certainly their own book knows the feeling. But when you get that batch and you've got 2,000 books sitting there, and you're like, I didn't even have the money to print these up. So how in the fuck am I going to sell these? It's a very frightening and daunting thing. So it makes it that much more gratifying when it actually does eventually sell. Because first of all, because you're like, okay, now I'm not going to have to mortgage my house. But it's good because it feels good. to kind of see something, have a crazy idea, and see it through, and not have it bomb and be a complete shit show. So,
especially before like that era with the internet, and so like a lot of word of mouth.
Yeah, but it's like I've always had the one thing I've always respected. I mean, well, the one thing I've definitely always respected is if I have a choice between an artist who's on a major label and an indie, obviously I'm always going to go for the indie person, because I realize as a consumer, and still to this day, the whole thing with people listening to shit on Spotify and back in the day, people stealing music on Napster, they thought that was funny. I always thought, like, fuck you. Like how dare you?
For people like us that every Tuesday we were buying new records.
But even just you and I both have a lot of friends who are artists and musicians, and like the struggle that they go through, and that it's not easy to put out your own record or put out your own book. So support at all costs. So so the whole thing is it hasn't been easy, but it's been fun. Like I'm proud of it, and it hasn't made me rich or even anywhere near that, but I haven't lost money, and that's all I wanted to do going in is kind of present ideas the way I wanted them to be presented. Even when I was with Random House, I was kind of calling the shots in a way, which was maybe a bit snotty and a bit ballsy of me to be telling Random House this is how it's going to go. But I was like, well, like I'm just going to regret it if I don't, and maybe they'll just be like, screw you, I don't care what you think. But honestly, they actually let me and I wasn't like a dick about it. I didn't walk into board meetings and be like, here's the way this is gonna go. You know, I said I think it would be better if and because you should. So the Random House thing was my first bigger book, which is called Check the Technique Volume 1. That was in 2007. And it turned out really well. Like, it wasn't a bad experience. I didn't ever work with a major publishing house after that on purpose, for a lot of different reasons. But it wasn't because it was a bad experience. I think I got kind of lucky, and I honestly believe that part of the reason why they listened to me is because they knew that I had self-published a book and I had sold X number of those. So I at least had some idea on how to do this, and I wasn't just making suggestions and making demands just to be a dick. I had a point of view, and I mean, I always think you should be your own best customer, you know? So if I did a book about whatever, the history of soap operas, or I wrote a book about architecture, I'd be completely out of my element, and it would suck. So, you know, if you're writing something that you would yourself be the perfect customer for, people should listen to you.
So the Check the Technique book goes through different records, similar to the Rakim Told Me.
Yeah, it's the same format. You know, so each chapter was basically an album. And I went at them, I call it invisible liner notes. So they were liner notes for albums that never had liner notes, but I always wish they had. So this was me saying, fine, like kind of like everything else in my writing career, like, well, I'll just do it myself. Like if the artist isn't gonna do it and the label's not gonna do it, then I'll just do it. And it's been kind of interesting. It's been like this weird self-fulfilling prophecy in a certain way with certain albums, because then they'll be doing a reissue, some label, and they'll say, oh, can we use your invisible liner notes for our actual liner notes? And it's like, sure, that's great. For me, it's just, okay, that's found money, like, why not? But so basically it's each one of those, starting with Rakim Told Me, going through Check the Technique volumes 1 and 2, is one album, one chapter, and one group. And it just kind of tells the story, whether it's the artist's first album or fifth, it still goes back to the beginning of their career and talks about the question I always love asking, and I ask in pretty much every interview, at least for the book, is, what were you like as a kid? Like, how did you, for just the same way, you had asked, like, tell me, I don't want you to give me some bullshit about your new album and how it's the dopest thing ever. It's like, I want to know, like, who are you as a person? Like, why did you what made sense. How does the way that you were when you were 8 years old make sense to me, knowing what the music you made when you were 18?
Yeah.
And honestly, a lot of the artists I talk to, they love it because they'd never really been asked questions, or certainly not for a long time, because a lot of times you get artists, not just hip hop artists clearly, but you get them on their press tour, and I'm not popular enough to do 5 interviews in a row in a 2-hour span.
Yeah.
But it's horrible. It sucks because you're answering the same shit over and over.
Questions,
I would say probably 75% of the time from stupid people who just want your quote. Don't actually care about you. Don't really care that much about the album. Just like, I got to write this article. Give me 3 quotes. So I think artists appreciate when you do a deeper dive, exactly what you're doing here on the podcast. Like, that's why this whole era is kind of dope in that. First of all, people have a lot more control to do it the way they want it, but to dive deeper, because I think everyone, no matter who you are, wants to dive deep. Like, you feel cheated in a way if you only get to talk to doing an interview for like 5 minutes it sucks. It's like, it's kind of like, why did I even bother doing that? So, so that's when I usually get people, is away from their press tours, when they don't have a lot of obligations or not doing a lot of interviews, because that's how you really kind of get to dive a lot deeper. And that's really what those books are about. I mean, in the end, Check the Technique volumes and Rakim Told Me, it's all completely dependent on how much the artist gives a shit. So I have instances where I still get a half hour and they don't give me much, but that's kind of rare. I mean, most of the artists I talk to really do want to do this. They really do want to explore it more deeply. And, there's different artists who will call me 2 days later. Oh, there's something I thought about, I want to add. And that's like, that's incredible. Like, when that happens, awesome, when you get them into that zone where they're tapping into, sometimes you're almost like a psychologist, tell me about your mother. So it's cool. It's, I like that. And, some of the people I've interviewed, who I grew up idolizing as a fan, have now become friends, which is something I would clearly never think would happen. But it's dope because it's, in the end, it's really just people wanting to know about other people, which is that's what friendship's based on. It's not on this kind of a quick handshake. Hey, what's up, and see you later.
So early on, that must have been pretty surreal, interviewing people like Chuck D.
Absolutely. I mean,
getting to tap into their head for a little while.
No, to me, well, that's the thing too. Is I mean, I've never really been. There are probably 5 people who I would ever legitimately be starstruck by. And I think that's part of it. I mean, Chuck D is one of them. Because Public Enemy is definitely my favorite hip hop group of all time. But it's also interesting the time. I mean, I don't know how many times I've interviewed Chuck at this point, 5, 6. It's for me, it's clearly something that I never would have ever thought would happen. But it's kind of dope too, because I feel like now when I have an opportunity to interview Chuck D or Cool Keith or someone who I've interviewed many times before, that you're already have a huge leg up on anyone else who's going to interview them, or at least people who've only interviewed them for the first time, because you can skip over a lot of the bullshit.
They're comfortable with you.
It's kind of like, well, so we don't need to talk about that because we've already covered that. So let's dive really deep now. And that's as a journalist is incredible. And it's funny too. Like sometimes, I mean, I'm not like tight with any real big stars, but local hip hop people, it's interesting interviewing your friends. It's like, that feels weird. It's almost like interviewing, like one of your siblings. They just be like, screw you, shut up, you dick, like, so that's another interesting trick is when you, someone you just shoot the shit with, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh no, this is actually serious now, man. Like, so stop fucking around, and that's cool too. Like, because I think in the same way that I'm a huge photography fan, so and especially music photography. So someone like Glenn Friedman, the reason that he's a great photographer, he was in the right place at the right time. He muscled his way into places and into the front of stages and this and that. But finally, the most important thing, honestly, I think the technical aspect is about 60% of it. And I think at least 20% that people normally don't account for is the personal connection. So when he's doing Black Flag or Suicidal Tendencies, or like some of these groups, he is friends with them. So they let their guards down instantly. It's not the kind of thing where you have to warm up. And that's when you get these incredible shots that no one else could get. I mean, you also get things that, like, there's one shot that I think is the one that's the silliest of, that he ever did, which was I don't know if you've ever seen the shot of Public Enemy wearing the Minor Threat shirts. Okay. What is that? Is that a Public Enemy shirt?
It's some guy made these.
But it looks so unnatural. Like, but it makes sense because he knew those guys. And that's kind of when it's taken a little bit too far, where it's like trying to crowbar something. That's pretty funny. And it's not like it wasn't legit. It's not like they didn't like Minor Threat, but they're both wearing them. It's kind of like your mom, like, forcing you to wear the sweater that your grandma gave you for Christmas to take the picture so you can show them that you were wearing it. Anyways, that takes nothing away. That's just a minor thing I always thought was funny, and it's still a good picture. But what it boils down to is the photographers who were part of the scene legitimately sometimes you, like, journalists are kind of like, don't want to get too close. Like, what was... Almost Famous, it's like, don't get too close to the artist because then you're going to be tainted. I actually don't agree with that. I mean, I think that you can get an extra 10 layers of depth into something. I mean, you could do it in a way, I guess, if you're just kind of a society reporter or you're legitimately taking bribes is obviously a whole different thing. But I think that when you're a photographer or an interviewer or whatever, that you really benefit from the trust that you can kind of build up with someone. And it's dope. I mean, so early on, it was definitely trippy for me to interview some of these artists because they were my idols. But it was good too, because you would get off the phone and you might not be like, oh my God, I was so awesome, but you'd be like, well, they didn't hang up on me. Like, I hung up on them. I said, oh, okay, so we're all set. And so that was good. And I think that's important as an interviewer and a writer early on. It's important to get that confidence in the same way, whatever you're doing is in sports, et cetera, like that you get that out of the way. And you can kind of build on it. And like, then, okay, so next time I'm going to have that a little bit of extra confidence that I'm not going to turn into Chris Farley and, you remember that time? Because that can happen too. I'm sure it'd be funny for me to listen. I have all my tapes, like, of all the interviews I've ever done. It would be very painful and funny for me to go back and listen to early an interview I did in maybe like 96, because I'm sure I would have been like, what a dork. Like, how did they not hang up on me, But it's cool. I mean, I think the biggest compliment I can get is an unspoken one, which is the trick that any seasoned writer knows, if you want to get a deep interview, you say, I only need 20 minutes. When you want an hour. And if you get to an hour, then you're like, all right, then that was a really dope interview, because they thought they were only getting in for 20 minutes. If they were sick of it, if they didn't care, they would have said, hey, I got to go. And then you say, fair enough. I said 20 minutes. So that's like a really nice compliment in a way that you've kept them on the line, and that you've engaged them enough that they wanted to keep the conversation going. Because some of these guys, I don't talk to a lot of the super highest realm of people, but like, I remember interviewing Ice Cube, and definitely thinking in my head, what is his hourly rate? Like, how much could you quantify a 24-hour day for Ice Cube, and how much money he makes per minute is probably more than I make, in at least definitely a week, if not a year, who knows? So I was very conscious of that, and that I got an hour of his time was like, shit, like, okay. Yeah. He definitely had better things to do, no matter what they were. Yeah. And he chose to kind of use those with me, at least for that time. So, so it's not about, that was the dopest interview ever, but it's kind of like you're engaging people in a level where it's friendly and like a conversation. And it's not an interview. Like, so.
And you must have then that probably opened up listening to these records completely. Because I know when I've read through your book, then when I go back and listen to those records, it opens up. So actually talking to these people must have changed that a lot. Like,
and it's interesting too, sometimes like a good example is Slick Rick. So, The Great Adventures of Slick Rick is definitely my top 10 like of all time. I'm sure I know word for word every part of that album. Yeah. And talking to him though was interesting because as a fan, you think, oh my God, they must have been like this. How did they even come up with this and this and that? And Rick was very matter of fact about everything. We just made the song. And I was like, yeah, but wasn't there this like back and forth and you did like 20 takes? He's like, no, I just did one. So sometimes it's kind of funny where it's like a sobering thing, I guess, as a fan that some artists are just that talented that they don't have to work. They don't have to do 20 takes. They just do one or two and they're like, yeah, I'm good. Yeah. That's kind of fascinating. That certainly makes you look at it very differently. But yeah, I mean, I think that's always been my approach is knowing more about the process that went into an album being made, knowing more about the artist themselves as a person beyond being an artist can never hurt the way you think. It can only increase
of course.
Unless you find out that they're a complete asshole, then that's a whole different thing. Right. Yeah. And I have found that out, but I think pretty rarely. Yeah. And that's the one thing that's always been like gratifying to me because like I think in a way too, and I think sometimes me being able to get time with some of these people and certainly to do a second interview at some point speaks to the fact that a lot of times I think people do approach, and it's easy to do, people who approach people who are larger than life and they've seen the videos and they see them in a crowd with there's 20,000 people to show. But if you just still have a conversation with them like they're your neighbor, they appreciate that because they're used to being treated like these gods, but they're just like, I mean, I go to the grocery store too. Like I get my oil changed, so I think a lot of people appreciate that on a certain level. Like they don't want to have, there's plenty of people to kiss their ass if they want that. Yeah. So like if you don't do that, I think it's certainly, if you just ask them very conversational questions and that every artist wants to be on that level versus, oh my God, you're so great. Aren't you so awesome? Oh my God, you are like incredible that it's ridiculous. Yeah. So that's not a way to, if you have a conversation that's that uneven, it's never going to be a fruitful one really. So that's what I also tell kind of young writers if they ask for any advice. It's definitely, you should be respectful. Right. You shouldn't be like, I don't care, who cares who you are. But you also shouldn't kiss their ass too much because then you're just not really going to get anything done. Yeah. And honestly, they get that all the time. Yeah. So it's not that interesting to them. Certain people. I mean, it's different if you're coming up. Right. But really what they want to know is in the same respect that if someone comes up to me and is talking about one of my books, is just like, yeah, I really enjoyed it, and I go back to it often, or this helped me through a tough time in my, no one says that to me. Right. But if you're an artist who is making music that's very emotional, et cetera, that I think probably means the most to them is knowing that people go back to their work, the stuff that they've produced over years, you know, and it's always the source of whatever it is, inspiration or, you know, it consoles them somehow or whatever.
Yeah. And you managed to hit that balance between being like a big fan of these artists without.
Yeah, I hope so. I mean, because at the end I am a fanboy, you know, it's like, and I certainly, they know that, but I try not to make that the main crux of our relationship is like, oh my God, you're so awesome. Have
there been, so there must have been challenging ones, like tracking some people down to talk to for some of these articles, or people that just were kind of cold and didn't really feel like that kind of thing?
I mean, I would say very few of them. I've had very few bad experiences. Once I got someone on the phone, I think, and I'm not going to say who that was, just, you know, because it doesn't matter, because honestly, it's such a small percentage. Very frequently, it's hard to get somebody on the phone. For various reasons, because artists, and certainly not just hip hop artists, but artists tend to be on their own clock, and they tend to have their head in the clouds, and doing business is not something, keeping in mind that there is a reason that people do have press days, because if you're trying to get, I don't know, Ghostface Killah, then you're probably going to have a much better bet getting him on a press day when he's trapped in a hotel room by his publicist than if you're like, hey, can you call me Tuesday at like 3 o'clock?
Yeah, of course.
Then that will end up turning into Wednesday at 4. And so then you get into the Wu-Tang Clan are a good example of like that, except for RZA. I mean, certain guys in Wu-Tang, but generally you get into this thing where... they get out of their element. They can be structured, but it's a weird structure. You know what I mean? Like the structure is, I go to the recording studio every night at 10 p.m. and I go to bed at 6 a.m. So if you're not willing to fit within that structure, it can be tricky. So so I would say even, and honestly, even with people who I know and I would consider a low-level friend, from their standpoint, I'm low-level on their friends list. But even that's hard. I mean, there's one artist right now that is not even, I'm not even trying to interview him. I just had this question and he's got a cell phone clearly. And it's like, just text me back. I just need to know, is it a yes or no? And even that's hard. So it just totally depends, but they're all have their own, each interview, each chapter has its own weird journey to it. And it's, you know, it's not fun all the time. Like putting together these books is like the most insane puzzle you've ever seen. And you're halfway done with the puzzle and all the pieces are on the table and someone comes by with a sledgehammer and smashes everything, and everything goes not only, you know, across the table, but into the other room. And you're just like, oh my God. So that's the thing that's tricky. And I try not to, I definitely don't linger on chapters and artists that I haven't been able to get, because if there's an artist that fans of the books, if they haven't been in there, there's a reason. So there's a reason why I haven't done Nas or Queen Latifah or something like that. And it's not because of my lack of trying. And it's not because they're an asshole. It's just a lot of time. The bigger artists definitely surround themselves with this whole army of people who are being paid to keep me away from them. That if I'm not from, you know, the Today Show or Entertainment Weekly, then what the hell, what is that going to do? So then you have to go through a whole different process of, I honestly, and this is the beautiful irony of all of it, is I'm a publicist as my, you know, the way I actually make money. I hate dealing with publicists. Not because I don't respect what publicity is, but if you get to a level and you're the publicist for a superstar, I'm the last person you want to, because it's not for them, it doesn't look good.
Yeah.
From a report they're giving monthly, you know, Will Smith did this interview for a book that's going to come out in a year and a half, and will probably, you know, not sell anywhere near as many copies as you might hope it would. So that doesn't really help them. And I understand the angles, and I don't get upset by it. So, yeah, so they're all kind of varying degrees of difficult. But once you get them on the phone, I've very rarely had an issue. You know, but sometimes it's on the fourth try that is when it actually happens, or even more. So when I do these books, you have to be in the zone. So it's like if you have kids, like what you want to happen on a Saturday afternoon is not what's going to happen. It's whatever birthday party is out there, and whatever sickness they are going to be getting from being in school and blah, blah, blah. So you don't matter. So you have to kind of put yourself in that zone. Okay, my ego does not matter here at all. So you have to say, not, I need to interview Snoop Dogg on Tuesday at 4:00, but you tell me, when is he available in the next month? I will make myself available. If it's 3 a.m, I'll do it. So if you're not willing to do that, you're not going to get a book. Like my books are 500 plus pages long, and it's a lot of shit in there. But and I think that speaks to the fact that I'm tenacious and persistent, but also that artists do like to kind of talk about all this stuff.
And so these books too celebrate sort of the art of, at least to me, the LP and the record. Which do you think that, like in hip hop now, that's just not really a thing at this? I mean, there's artists making records. But
I don't know. Well, like, so it's a really good question, and I would say generally, well, in 2018, it's actually very difficult for me to answer the question, do you like hip hop? I would say most of the stuff that comes out is not only bad, but is just garbage. Like Lil Yachty, and I can't even comprehend it on a level of me. So it certainly works against you to have any kind of historical knowledge of the hip hop genre with a lot of this stuff. That being said, back in 1997, I could also say, a lot of that pop stuff I think sucks. So I listened to Company Flow and Black Star and whatever. So hip hop is a big enough house and a big enough tent, or whatever metaphor you want, that there's always going to be plenty to find. So I think there's still a lot of artists, almost all indie artists, but who do care about albums, and they grew up on them. There was one trend that I think was particularly bad that happened in the early 2000s, late 90s, where artists started to be like, oh, wow, so we could do 23 songs and fit them all on a CD. And it's like, no, dude, just because you can do 23 songs does not mean you should do 23 songs. So that was bad. And that even happened with indie people that
double albums. And,
people would do records, and you're just like, oh, why did you do 18 tracks, dude? Couldn't you just, 10? What's wrong with 10? 10 of the best ones, you know? Because if you're doing an album every year, it shouldn't be 18 tracks. Of course. That should be your album if you haven't put one out for 5 or 10 years. Anyway, so I think that now that CDs aren't really a thing anymore, which I couldn't be happier about. I think some artists, indie artists, are kind of not feeling that pressure to fill every second in a CD. And they're like, maybe I'll do an EP, or maybe I'll just worry about a couple good songs. So in a weird way, the iTunification of the world makes it back to the early 80s, where it's like, I can just put out a 12-inch and maybe I'll put out an album. It'd be nice, but let me just put out a song or two. Whereas everyone could put out an album in the 90s and 2000s, and everyone was. So I think I don't worry myself about the state of hip hop because I think there's always going to be so many good indie artists that don't give a shit about the status quo and what a lot of all these kids with yarn in their hair are doing.
Right.
But so I don't worry about it.
Yeah.
But I think if anything, the fact that the CDs are, I think, what really killed, and I think kind of random shuffle play and certainly iTunes kind of messed things up.
Right.
But I think there are people who still in rock and hip hop and all kinds of that they do still focus on albums.
Like a full album.
Yeah, because there's still good albums coming out.
Yeah.
You know, so that's good.
Yeah.
But that was, I think, my main thing was like the whole, I don't know. I don't know what the max. I mean, of course, there's skits in there, but you know, it's like 25 tracks. Like, come on, dude.
Right.
What in the fuck are you doing? Why would you do that? And I don't think rock suffered from that as much. But you know, you get some Redman album from like the early 2000s. It's like, nah, dude.
Yeah.
Like, I love you, but nah, I don't love you. 22 tracks.
Yeah.
Enough. That's not right.
Yeah.
And I think it was a lot of times some of these artists, especially on majors. Yeah. They just don't seem to have anyone in their orbit just telling them like, what are you doing?
Right.
Like, why? Yeah, friends. Like, don't they have friends who'd be like, dude, stop. Come on. 10 tracks, 12. I dare you. Redman, I dare you to do 10 tracks. You know,
I know, right?
See if you can impress me with 10 tracks. Like, that would be a beautiful thing for a friend to do.
Yeah.
You know, and that's not to shit on Redman. I love Redman, but any artist. Yeah. I can't think of that many artists that I could listen to 22 new tracks of. That's just crazy.
So for you, the what would you consider the golden age of hip hop at least for you?
Yeah, I mean, it's clearly very subjective. Yeah. And clearly so it's interesting because I have friends who were kind of the generation after me, and to them, you know, the mid 90s, late 90s, I could never really get like the whole Diplomats and like really because I just came from the era before that where you know, it was more about, and clearly there were exceptions, but it was about skill and it was about competition and it was about this one-upmanship where the 2 or 3 generations after my golden age, which to answer your question, I would say was about 87 to 91. Yeah. That's kind of my sweet spot. Yeah. And I can say that because I was there and because I've seen all the stuff that's come out after that end of that era, you know, not before it, but before it, clearly there wasn't really an album part of hip hop. It was there, but even the early Run DMC albums were half dope, incredible shit and half filler. Yeah. So because it wasn't an album art form, it was Curtis Blow put out albums, but it was really singles with some, you know, other stuff in there. Yeah. Until you got to 87, 88, it wasn't like, wow, that's a dope tape. Like this is all the way through is incredible. You know, Ice-T and Boogie Down Productions and Public Enemy. So I would say that. I mean, and I think I understand why it's always going to be, you know, whatever. Where you lost your virginity when, like that's kind of where your sweet spot's going to be. Yeah, whatever your age is. But I will say that I feel bad for people who came of age in listening to hip hop in the early 2000s because that was not a golden era. Yeah. And if anyone says that, I would say that you're too young to be able to. Yeah. And people will be like, fuck him, man. What's he talking about? He's just an old man. It's like, yeah. But I was there. Like, I remember when it happened. And the thing I would say, too, besides, obviously, everyone has their own opinion about it, is the one thing I can say is that even though I'm an old man and I'm 48, I still listen to stuff and I enjoy it as much, the stuff I was listening to when I was 15, and not in an old fogey kind of way. Like it still energizes me and, you know, makes me want to like punch shit. And that's great. Like I've always kept my earliest demand of music, which was just to shake me up, to kind of energize me to make, the hair on your arm stand up. Yeah. And so it's not like I'm now listening to smooth jazz and like that stuff just gives me a headache when I listen to it. Yeah. Like I still demand the same thing out of music as I did. And I love to hear new stuff that excites me. Yeah. Like I want to hear that. I don't hear it very often these days, in part because I've just heard enough that it takes a lot, as you or me or any of our friends, it takes a lot to impress you to hear new stuff. Yeah. But when you do get excited about something, like that says something, It's rare. So
it's funny too, because a few years ago I worked a job in a warehouse with a bunch of kids in their 20s. Yeah. I remember we had a radio and I put Paul's Boutique on. Yeah. And just watching their faces and just me hearing it and sort of getting inside them, I'm like, I can tell that they're like, what in the fuck? This is the worst fucking... And I could kind of tell like it sounded like shit
They
to them.
Didn't like it?
They didn't like it, yeah. And they were, they were pretty open-minded kids with some stuff. So I kind of... It's weird to think that would alienate people or...
It's interesting.
It sounded like I could hear it sounding dated to them. You know what I mean?
It's weird though. So, because like what I would say to that is, for me, when I listen to something, the best thing I can have happen to me is to be perplexed, because me personally, that means I'm like, I have to solve this equation. Like, what the fuck is this? Right. And what's the context? So if it's out of context, I mean, and so I guess to be fair, if I listen to Lil Dipshit or whoever all these people are, I should maybe want to figure it out, but I really, truly don't believe there's much to figure out. Right. I don't think I'm missing anything. I think that it's exactly what it seems, which is some kid who doesn't actually give a shit about the art form and is just, I think the worst thing is not even some of these young hip hop people lyrically, which lyrically they're also not saying anything, but the music is just total garbage. It's so unimaginative, and clearly, the sampling thing and getting sued and worrying about samples, blah blah blah. That's a legitimate thing. Yeah. That's not an excuse, because there's a lot of people who make great music in the mid '90s onwards, who didn't sample or who sampled in such a way that it wasn't even discernible. Yeah. So you don't get a pass for being like, oh, well, I have to use a keyboard and just one finger and like two notes. It's like, no, you're just lazy and stupid. Yeah. So that's kind of all I ask as a fan, is like, just try. Yeah. Yeah, just try to do something different and try and be better than someone else. And I guarantee you that, when Little Dipshit goes into the studio, it's not, I'm going to make the dopest record ever. It's just like, I'm going to get paid. Like, let me figure out how to do this. Yeah. And I think that clearly there's tons of indie artists who don't have that problem, who don't think that way. And that's great. And I love that. And that's why I don't ever worry about hip hop specifically, because there's always going to be this underground,
that world,
that wants to push things and wants to do interesting things. But, so it's hard when whatever, like you're at a cocktail party and you meet someone and they're like, oh, you write about hip hop, like you like hip hop, and it's kind of like, do I even want to engage this person? Because I don't have time to say, well, here's the deal. So I like, I love Adrian Young and some of the work that he does, but I don't like the popular stuff because it's not because they don't. How are you going to explain that to someone who doesn't? If you don't know anything about hip hop now, then you're
There's
willfully
no starting point.
You're just willfully ignorant. Right. Like you can't say, "Oh, I don't know how to even find out about it." It's like you don't like it, and that's fine. But I'm not here to explain it to you. Like go online, go on YouTube. Yeah, I know. It's not my job. Because that's the thing about my books too, is I think the one thing you would agree, whether you notice that as you're checking it out, or whether when I say this you'll be like, "Oh yeah," is I don't write my books for beginners. Like you have to know, you have to know a little bit about hip hop before diving in, or you're going to be lost. Like you're in the deep end once you jump into any of my chapters, and I make no excuses for that. Like I'm not here to explain hip hop to you. I'm here to give you a chance to understand these artists in a much deeper way. So I'm not 101 in the
Right.
class. I'm
Yeah, of
303 and
Yeah,
maybe
yeah.
even, a graduate level
Yeah.
kind of class.
Yeah.
And that's good because
Yeah.
if you want someone to explain it to
Right.
you, then you can go to, there's
Yeah.
plenty of other
Right.
people who can explain that to you,
Yeah.
and I'm not going to waste time doing
Yeah.
it.
No, I think, and that's what attracted me to the books. It's
Yeah,
definitely
and I
for-
appreciate that
for
because then,
fans and
well, but that's the thing is like that's, I want to be, when I read a book,
Yeah.
I don't want to be talked down to.
right,
you
right.
know? So it's not like,
it's like another friend of mine that's into hip hop going, hey,
Yeah.
look what I found out. Look at what so and so told me how,
Yeah, and in this day and age, you don't. That's the whole. Like I met, so I won't say who it is, but I met someone who's like a rock person,
Yeah.
and actually a pretty well known rock
Yeah.
media person. Let me just say that.
Yeah.
And this is literally a year or two ago, and they were like, "What? Yeah, I just don't know anything about hip hop," and I'm like, "Well, you're a fucking asshole,
Right.
Like you're
Right.
You sound like you want to know more about it,
Right.
but you really don't." So, they're like, "Tell me about it."
Right.
Like looking at me in the eye, and I'm like, and I literally said, I was like, "No."
Yeah. Right.
Like I'm not that dude.
Yeah.
You find someone else to do that for
Yeah.
you because
Yeah.
you're just not trying. Like
Yeah.
it'd be different in 1983
Right,
if you
of
were
course.
a white rock
Right.
dude,
Yeah, where do I
and you
find-
grew up in Concord, Mass,
Right.
and you're like, I don't know much about Cool Herc. Then I'll be
Right.
like, that's fair. That's
Right.
completely. I understand.
Right.
You don't know about Cool Herc.
Yeah.
And if I know something about Cool Herc, yeah, let me tell you more about him.
Yeah.
But now it's like, nah,
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
not
Especially
that
if you're
dude.
in entertainment in this year.
I just thought it was hilarious, and but that happens a lot, and
Yeah.
it's fine. So the thing that pissed me off was not that they didn't know about it, but they pretended like
Right.
they wanted to know, but as
Yeah.
if they weren't able to.
Yeah.
And I was
Yeah,
just
of
like,
course.
come on, dude.
Yeah. The other thing I think is going in hip hop too with like a lot of the newer stuff is turntablism, and DJs are just
It's
sort of
gone
a thing
away.
of the past. Like I remember
Yeah,
thinking that that was always it's one of the elements of hip hop, and that was
you're
one of my
100%.
favorite things in records is obviously the MCs, but that was like the other part.
100%. 100%. I mean, it's still, but yet again, it's still in a lot of indie stuff.
Yeah,
the
of course.
DJ is
Yeah.
still important.
Yeah.
It's trickier because a lot of DJs became producers. That's all. Almost every producer in hip hop is a DJ.
Yeah.
Maybe not now, but back from the late 90s, moving
Yeah.
backwards from that, because that made sense. You were
Yeah.
the guy who played the records, and
Right.
so you knew what I could sample
Yeah.
and this and that. It's interesting because, like, for example, Jazzy Jeff still tours the world,
Yeah.
literally all year long, and
Yeah.
not just a couple dates here and there. He
Right.
probably does 150 dates a year in like Vietnam and
Right.
Saudi Arabia
Right.
and all this stuff. So there is a demand, and people still, there's nothing you can there's no way you can replace what it's like if you're inclined to enjoy that
Yeah.
and seeing a DJ perform live. You can't approximate it.
Yeah.
I mean, then there's different levels of that too. So I have friends who are DJs who only DJ not only vinyl but
Right.
45s.
Yeah.
So that's like a whole. Oh my
Right.
god, that's people who don't DJ don't really understand how difficult it is to be a 45
I
DJ. It's like being a like a tightrope walker or
Yeah.
something like that. It's very different, and I can't do it. I'm not a very good DJ.
Yeah.
I'm more of a radio DJ, but
Right.
I'd be terrified to do like a 45 set in front of a live
Yeah.
group of people and being paid for it. I'd be like, oh man, I know I'm gonna fuck up.
Yeah.
So I think that yet again, I think there's this whole since the mid 90s, there's been this level of like the stars, the major label people.
Yeah.
And so as far as those people are, yes, DJs definitely don't exist.
Yeah.
Whereas before, I mean, one of my the saddest eras, but also the most amusing eras to me were as I used to call them, like the invisible DJs. So you'd have like, Linkin Park, or like Limp Bizkit had a DJ, and you're just like, and actually Limp Bizkit, DJ Lethal, but
DJ Lethal,
they'd have them like,
right,
like you're craning, you're like, I don't hear it, I'm not hearing any DJing going on here.
Yeah.
So there was that thing where you were a prop, you were like a backup dancer. So it is too bad that a lot of that doesn't exist on record anymore. But I think that's also just where hip hop is just evolving, but it's still there, and it's out there in the world on a lower level or on a Jazzy Jeff level, or you could also argue certainly beyond hip hop that DJing's never been bigger with all these, EDM dipshits and and are they DJing? They're pressing buttons, blah, blah, blah. Who knows? That's an infinite argument that can happen. But I think in any kind of music, the thing that I don't get down about in hip hop or beyond is if you want to find it, it's out there.
Yeah.
So now you have no excuse.
Yeah,
if you want to see it live, or certainly if you want to hear it. The internet has expanded everything. I just found something yesterday. I posted on Facebook. There's like a whole movement within like death metal of this like anti-Nazi thing, and I'm like, that makes sense, and that's fucking great. Shit. Okay, I'll take all of it. Like line it up, and I'll buy all of it. So, but I didn't even think about like, maybe there's a subgenre of Cookie Monster shit that's all screaming about, how all right-wing people are evil. And it's like, I can get down with that. So that's kind of the crazy thing, is that it's always out there. But and DJing is one of the most accessible things. If you do want to get that fix, you can get it. But I agree 100% that on record, it has, for the most part, certainly been put to the back burner. But they're still like, Rob Swift and Qbert. I just saw Qbert post a video yesterday of, so they're still, and Qbert's as forward thinking as he ever has been. He constantly is thinking of different ways to DJ. And just when you think that you can't find another way to do a scratch, like he does that. So that makes me glad that, it's too bad it's not prevalent. But it's always there. You can always find it. Yeah.
That, and I've noticed too, I wonder what you think of why this is, but groups in hip hop aren't really a thing anymore. It's more of just sort of solo artists.
Yeah.
Like, can't really think of, there's
it's
duos.
Interesting.
There's a lot of duos, like, Outkast is.
There are, it's mostly solo artists. Yeah, I don't know. Because I guess that's a generational thing. Like you just, it's harder to have. I often say, so one of my favorite chapters in any of my books is the Wu-Tang Clan chapter. Not for the reason of, and this is actually for me being a super overthink everything nerd when I think of all this stuff. But the thing that most people don't really understand about the Wu-Tang Clan, that I didn't understand either before I kind of did more of these interviews and research, is I'm not sure if people can really imagine how difficult it would have been in 1992 for RZA to convince 8 other people who were all broke as shit, desperate to make it and get money and da-da-da-da-da, as any young artist is in any genre. Here's the thing. So we're going to be in this huge ass group, and this pie is going to be sliced, 8 or 9 different ways. So you're not going to make much, and we're going to make this album, and we're not going to get paid that much up front. But my plan is in 5 years that all of you are going to make a lot of money as solo artists, because I'm using this. So anyways, it's like he had this plan legitimate, and it's not just RZA telling me this. It's Steve Rifkin from Loud said the same exact thing. Is he had this 5-year plan, and it came true. So, but he was able to convince hip hop. Everyone's competing against each other. I'm sure fighting with each other. Who's going to be on this song? Who's going to be on this track? And he did it. He did it. He did the first Wu-Tang album. It wasn't a large advance. It blew the fuck up. And then he started peeling them all off as solo artists. Now, RZA is also a genius because he was also part of the management team and was producing them.
Yeah.
So he's making all the money off this, including the artist. But Method Man, they all started peeling off ODB, and they all made money on their own, and then they get back. So when it doesn't really make you enjoy Protect Your Neck anymore.
Right.
Think you're getting super nerdy about it, but it certainly makes you appreciate the vision and how difficult that, not only the vision, but the persona, like the gravitas you would have to convince a bunch of starving dudes competing against each other to be the dopest, and say, look, if we're better as a group, then I promise you, you're going to get rich as a solo artist. Like I don't know if you could do it now. I mean, I don't know honestly how you did it back then. But he did it. So that gives me an extra appreciation. But yeah, I mean, I guess it's like a generational thing, you know? So I think, what the hell's Odd Future, you know, but Odd Future aren't really a group anymore. So, it's a good question. I mean, there aren't as many groups. Partially too, because I think that you don't really see strength in numbers as an advantage anymore, because you can make a record in your bedroom with a keyboard for almost no money, and maybe you're just making it all off your computer for free apps. So why the fuck would I split this 5 ways? Like that doesn't make any sense. And I can sell it on iTunes and I can make all the money. Why would I split it 5 ways? Like they don't see the strength in numbers, but you know, the roots are still around. They're still doing it. So, but you're right for sure that it is a generational thing, that it's not, I definitely think artists coming up, if you're 17 years old right now, your goal is not to get in a group.
Of course.
It's like, why would I do that? Why would I share my shit? You know, so anyways, so that's legit.
Cool. So I want to get into your new book, but I was going to ask you one more thing. Were you going to? Would there be a third volume of the technique?
I don't know. I don't think I'm. I'm in no rush, and don't have any real desire to do another. As I said, you know, earlier in the interview, I definitely get bored easily, and I don't like repeating myself. I'm kind of surprised I did a volume 2, to be honest with you, but I did feel like there were some chapters that I could get done that I hadn't, that I still wanted to do before I died. So I was like, and sometimes too, it happens where it's like, you know, the position where I'm at right now in my career and the gigs that I have is like, I could do this. If I really focused for 3 months, I could pound this out. And it takes longer than that, obviously. But for example, so no, I don't think I could, but it's not a goal of mine. I feel like I've done plenty and I'm proud of the body of work. And, so who knows if someone wants to offer me a bunch of money to do volume 3, which they will not, then sure. But it's good too, because I think there's a lot of work being done in that same zone now too, which also makes me want to do it less. With all these people doing these long online pieces and these kind of podcasts specific that do that kind of thing. It's kind of like, not like I'm better than them, but it's kind of like there are other people doing it. What my career, if you really look at it under a microscope, is I look for something that people aren't really doing. Not necessarily that they've never done, but something that's very unsexy in the marketplace. And I go for that. You know, I don't go for whatever's hot. And I do that. And then I find some other kind of way to go that is yet relatively unexplored, and then I go in that direction, which I suppose leads us into Buy Me Boston a little bit. But
let's talk about Buy Me Boston and how this book came about.
So that's my new one, which is pretty much just out. It's called Buy Me Boston, Local Ads and Flyers, 1960s through 1980s, Volume 1. It says, usually I don't put volume on the cover, but I've always envisioned this as a multi-volume thing. So what it is a bunch of advertisements, all Boston stuff, or just that the area. So
Yeah.
it's not just Boston
Right.
proper, but
Yeah.
it's not like New Hampshire
Right.
and Rhode Island. So, and it's basically, I mean, I think the easiest way to describe it is it's all ads and flyers and posters, and it's kind of reconstructing a city that doesn't exist anymore, being Boston in the late 20th century, but purely through the advertisements, not through photos, not through articles that have been written, which was another way I could have gone. Because so I kind of took it as a challenge. Usually people don't pay attention to ads. They're they're annoying if they're on TV. I've always paid attention. I love ads. I love commercials. I love print ads, and I always have. But most people consider them to be annoying distractions or purely utilitarian. What's the address of that club? Who's playing Saturday? Not, oh, that's really well done, or look at that cool drawing. Or people don't generally do that. So I had access to these amazing archives. Chiefly David Bieber's and Kay Bourne, who were Boston archivists, historians, journalists, media people, who had just saved a bunch of stuff. So you've been to David Bieber's archives, so you know the vastness of it.
Crazy.
And so it's basically just, it's not comprehensive. And because it would have been impossible unless it was a 7,000 page book. So I didn't worry about that. I just said, let's make it a breezy, honestly, it's not even chronological. It's not alphabetical. It's complete stream of consciousness. But I kind of like that too, because
that's what I like about it. When I first got it, I was like, oh, these aren't real. But then I think it makes it better, because then you're like, oh, what's on the next page? Leechmere. And a flyer for the Wrecking Crew, then
so I think I kind of like that, because I think it I've done books before. I've done them along thematic lines. I've done them chronological or alphabetical or whatever. And I just said, what if I just literally put this shit in a blender and it's all there? But what if you didn't know what was next? Because honestly, in a newspaper, you don't know what's next. So that made actually a lot of sense. And so I kind of just took that approach, and it was a lot of work. I mean, but it was mostly scanning. It wasn't writing. It wasn't interviewing. All of these ads are presented with pretty much zero context. It says the date and where I got it, but it doesn't say Night Stage was a club in Central Square on Main Street, and this band played there, and blah blah, and the stage was on the back of the club. So it skipped over all of that, because really what I wanted to do is either, if you grew up in that era, bring you back to that era, and if you didn't, make you want to know more about it, and honestly encourage you to do that on your own. Like, yet again, I'm not going to sit down and either say, okay, like, here's a lesson for the day. If you want to know about the rat, you could say that for sure. And so it's like, if you want to know about the rat, you can do that in lots of ways online. So I'm giving you a specific approach. So for instance, the one thing I like about the book is, because it's literally a 30-year span, I have in there the opening night of the Rathskeller, which is when it was always a venue, but it was kind of, now it's the Rathskeller, and we have I don't even know what it was called. It was like Joe's Kitchen, maybe, so it had a kitchen that eventually, of course, became the Hoodoo Barbecue. But this was like opening night, 1974. This is, the Rat became known as the CBGBs of Boston, the punk place, and it wasn't when it started, and that proves it. So it's kind of like, hopefully you look at that, and maybe you went to the Rat in '87, but you're like, oh shit, like, so they have bluegrass bands playing it, but then you're not also shocked. You're like, that makes sense. But the beauty is, then I have an ad too from the Rat from like 1976, and it's, here's the Ramones are coming, and Willie Loco Alexander, and it's like, all right, so these aren't bluegrass bands.
Right.
These are not cover bands.
Yeah.
There's something going on here.
Yeah.
Like I can see it. It's national, but it's also there's this local thing. And who the hell are the Inflictors?
Right.
And who's DMZ? What the hell is DMZ? And so I guess in a weird way, it was me. So you could say on one hand, it's me being lazy because I don't want to explain everything to you.
Right.
But I will say, you didn't hear that. And I will say, it's me daring you and saying, you should want to know more.
Yeah.
And here's a way for you to start.
Yeah.
Or if you already know it all, then you would be insulted if I told you what the rat was. That if you were there, then who am I to tell you who it was? You're 15 years older than I am, and you were there. So shame on me for having the audacity to tell you about the rat. You know, so it's fun. You know, and it's not just music. It's like hair salon. Some of my favorite ads are like the hair salon ads because then that's very of the era.
Of the era,
you know,
definitely.
you look at it and you're like, oh shit, yeah, that's 83.
Yep.
So those it's restaurants and theater stuff and cultural stuff and the Kite Festival and so really what it is like if you were there in that era, any part of that era, because I was only there for part of that era, and in the 60s I wasn't even born, so I certainly wasn't there for that part of it. So it brings you back, and it's not a book that's going to change the world, but it's fun. You know?
Definitely.
But there's also weight to it at certain times too. But it's not all dumb fun, and it's not all weight and heavy and historical. It's everything.
Yeah, I think anyone that's grown up around here, like you just said, and anyone I've shown this book to has loved it, and just it'll bring back memories of. Even
if you only know a third of it, you're still going to get something out of it. Which honestly. So you could go back to my other books and say, if you go into either one of the Check the Techniques, you probably, I mean, maybe you know all the albums, but chances are you don't know much about all of those artists because it's a wide range. There's like, you know, The Coup, and then there's also Run DMC. So maybe you don't really know who The Coup are, and you're like, oh, these sounds really interesting. I'd like to know more about them. So for me, it's like, that's gold.
Exactly.
Is if you get drawn in by the Beastie Boys chapter, but then you're like, I don't know who's Black Moon, and like, let me check this shit out. And then you're like, oh my God, this is awesome. And then all of a sudden, you know, it's like a mixtape. You buy, or a compilation, you buy a couple tracks, or you know that it's on a label you like, but you don't know half the artists. So hopefully some of what Buy Me Boston is about is there's nothing you can buy. You're not going to support a certain artist, but it's like learn about or go back to that era. So you're either going to get a warm, fuzzy feeling going, oh man, you know, like the Paradise back in 78 was incredible. I actually I'm still finding stuff constantly, which is yet again why there's going to be volumes. I had no idea. But yet again, like someone who was there in the era would be like, well, duh. Before, it's between, the Paradise was originally called the Boston Club, if I'm not mistaken, at the same location. But in between, there was this weird year or two phase where it was called Dummies.
Oh, really?
And it was actually, the reason it was called Dummies, according to now me, so I found the ad. And I'm like, that address looks familiar. So I looked it up, and I'm like, yeah, that's the Paradise. And I'm like, what in the hell is Dummies? And so, of course, I called David Bieber. I'm like, what the fuck was Dummies? It was like Madame Tussauds, like kind of wax figures.
Wow. Oh, that's amazing.
It's really...
so that's cool stuff to discover.
It's cool, but that's pretty stupid.
Of
So you're also like, I can see why that was only around for a year or two. You know, but stuff like that, I personally love. I love to know... what a building, what a location was 4 iterations ago, you know. So for instance, Night Stage, which is now completely gone, it was called the Two of Clubs in the 60s and early 70s. Then it became The Club. And by maybe mid 80s, it was Night Stage. But by the 90s, it was gone. And now it doesn't even exist. It's dust. So it's cool too. I love that kind of stuff. There's a bunch of books out there, like photo books, where it'll show a certain corner, like here's what Copley was in 1860, and here's what it looked like in 1940, and it's like, wow, you can see how everything. So it's the same kind of concept. I've always loved that. So it's me, but me approaching it from a very different perspective, which is telling it through the ads. Which the final thing I'll say about it, the reason I did it, or why I think it was an interesting challenge, is ads are the only way, unless it's just you talking to the owner of the establishment on the street, of them conveying exactly what they want to convey. So if you see an article written about a restaurant or a club or a band, you're seeing it through the lens of the journalist and the publication.
Of course.
That's how they want to frame it. But when you take an ad, you're paying. So you get to say whatever the hell you want. You get to make it look amazing. You get to make it look like shit. That's on you. You can make it. You can hire a great photographer or artist and do all this beautiful. So you look at these Tea Party ads from the 60s, and they're ornate and gorgeous. And you look at the channel ads, and it's like, it's just a list of shows. So, but that's fine. So everyone, every owner, it's about business owners too. You know, it's like every person approaches the way that they talk about their business differently. And that to me is fascinating. And for people who are interested in that, they get to see that range too, beyond who was playing at the Rat in 1977. It's fun. It's not meant to really change the world, but I think that people who were in that era look back on that fondly, because it just doesn't exist anymore.
It's part of our culture and in our blood. And
and so in a way, it's like shooting fish in a barrel, but hopefully the way I put it together, even though it's not exactly in an academic way, or it's not chronological, it's not completely scattershot. Like it makes a little bit of sense.
And so I'm going to release this episode in November. And you have an event coming up for this book. So what tell us about that?
So the event, which obviously if you're listening to this after the event, we won't be that impressed. But but although I'd like to do this event as hopefully the first in maybe a series of things that won't all be about my new book, but more just a Buy Me Boston event. So it's at the Brattle Theater, Sunday, November 11th, like all night. And it's going to be all not just about the book. It's going to be a bunch of videos that I found that are all Boston centric.
Oh, nice.
And some of them relate directly to the book, and some of them are kind of tangential. But so it'd be like Mission of Burma footage from the final show in 1983 at the Bradford. Human Sexual Response. There's this amazing video of theirs from '82 that Jan Crocker shot with the whole team. And each one of these, I'm not showing the whole thing. I'm going to show like 20 minutes, like little snippets, because I want it to create the whole range of what the book is about. So there's also a hip hop documentary from 1985 by Rock Against Racism organization, which is also important. I have flyers in the book from Rock Against Racism. So that there's some Prince Charles and the City Beat Band, who I'm frequently upset and horrified by that more Bostonians don't know Prince Charles and don't kind of like listen to his stuff with pride as being from Boston and incredibly fun band, accomplished, etc. And Prince Charles will actually be there on the panel that I'm going to do in the middle of all these crazy videos. So I want to make it like a whole thing and not just two-dimensional. I want it to be this video part of it, because I love the Brattle. I love old movie theaters, and I like seeing crazy shit on a big screen. So part of it is just because I'll be amused, but hopefully, yet again, other people will find it fun too, and it'll be an interaction. So right now, and hopefully, as long as there aren't any scheduling conflicts that arise, it will be me Blowfish from Boston Groupie News, who's an amazing guy.
Yeah.
David Bieber,
Yep.
who I couldn't have done the book without. His archive's incredible.
Yeah.
From WBCN back in the day. Not an on-air guy, but he worked for BCN, promo guy. And the Phoenix. And Dart Adams, who's an awesome local historian, does a podcast, is a journalist, a hip-hop guy, but not just a hip-hop guy, just loves Boston, lives and breathes it, constantly does historical posts like on his Instagram and Twitter.
Nice.
So it should be fun. It's going to be a little bit of everything. People can go show up at the beginning and stay all night, or just go to one part or the other, and it'll be different. The video portion will be different. It'll be like an hour of videos in 2 different segments. It should be fun. It's like the book itself, it would have been silly of me and inauthentic to make it too academic and too
like
egg-headed.
a slideshow or something.
Like, oh, sit down and I'll show you this overhead projector.
Yeah, that sounds like more of an event. I'm kind of bummed that I'm going to be out of town for this.
Yeah, it's going to be a mess. I'm sure shit'll go wrong, and I that's good. That's fine, because that's Boston and that's rock and roll, and that's the way it goes. So, but like I said, I hope to, because I keep running across crazy videos stuff, and as I'm looking at, and say a year ago I wasn't really thinking about it. I was like just focused on the paper goods and the ads and the Boston Phoenixes from the 70s. But now I see like a VHS tape and I'm like, wait a minute,
what is this?
A good example, a quick example, at David Bieber's archive, he has a bunch of Kiss 108 stuff from the golden days of Kiss 108. And all this VHS set on the side of it was Kiss dancers. And I was like, what the fuck is that? Like this, my mind is racing. Like, what does that even mean? And it was actually as dope as I hoped it would be. It was in the disco era in like 79, 80, which is right when Kiss 108 started. There was I forget who it was, but it was like a local dance studio had this collaboration between Kiss 108 and to teach disco dancing.
Oh, really?
And it was a show on like, probably on Channel 38 or something, this weekend variety show. And it was the Kiss dancers dancing to this like obscure disco song. And there's a disco ball in there. There's like 10 of them That's funny. And I'm like, holy shit, this is incredible. So this is the kind of stuff that as an archivist and as a digger, you kind of come across this stuff. And now instead of passing it over, I'm going to be like, I'm going to grab it and I'm going to digitize it. And then I'm hopefully going to share it at some point. But hopefully it'll be a thing like the Found Fifth Film Festival, but just a Boston centric type of thing. So we'll, it'll be fun. And, it's been great. The book so far, I've been definitely, pleasantly not surprised, but I've been gratified by people who are the ones that I made it for, which are the people who are maybe 55 to 65, who are right in the middle of this era. And they just look at it like it's their family album. And they're like, oh, like instead of there's Cousin Fred. It's like, shit, like there's the In Square Men's Bar. And, like, I remember that place. Oh shit, and that's what I wanted. I wanted people to be able to flip through it randomly. It's a good bathroom reader, and it has an index, so people can, if you want to just look through the index and specifically go to where you want to go, that's great. But it's been great. So, and local retail has been cool about it. Like Newbury Comics is carrying it, and
so where can people buy the book?
So you can buy it from me direct. It's just buymeboston.com, BUY me. But Newbury Comics, Brookline Booksmith, Trey Gatos and JP, Bodega is carrying it, which I find to be very amazing, because that place, I'm not anywhere near fashionable enough and hip enough to shop there, but they carry it. That's and awesome. They're very selective about what they carry, so that one's kind of cool. Shouts to Oliver, who owns it, who's a great DJ and is appreciates the historical aspect of it. And it'll be at even more local retail spots. I keep building, I'm doing all this stuff myself, and I'm building this distribution network, in air quotes, as I go along. I don't want to get it everywhere. I just want to get it in places where it makes sense.
Yeah.
You know, so like Newbury Comics is great. Like I really don't give a shit
Right.
if it's in Barnes and Noble. If
Right.
so, that's fine.
Yeah.
You can buy it on Amazon, but don't.
Right.
Don't do that. Buy it at a real retailer who
Yeah.
cares about the people whose wares they sell.
Yeah.
So it's been cool. But as the backup, anyone can order it directly from me. I'll have obviously copies at the show. I'm also going to do Boston Public Library talk in January.
Oh, okay.
I think on the 17th.
Yeah.
That Prince Charles will be there again, David Bieber, hopefully Kay Bourne.
Oh, okay.
So
Awesome.
it's all just kind of fun. And honestly, the reason I do my books, if you really want to boil it down to, is I get to have interesting conversations. I have an excuse to have great conversations with people, whether it's about hip hop or Boston, because I've done the hip hop thing, and I certainly haven't done as much as I could do, but I just think I'm turning my focus on Boston because I think there are a lot of stories to tell that haven't yet been told. But I think there are, Dirty Old Boston's incredible, and a lot of the things. There's a brand new documentary, I think, debuting tomorrow about Chet's.
Yeah, I saw that.
There's been stuff about the Rat and the Boys from Nowhere documentary is incredible. So it's exciting.
Yeah,
and honestly, there's enough out there that none of us are. It's all complimentary. No one's competing with anyone.
Right.
It's like awesome. Oh my God, there's a thing about DMZ and the Liars. Like bring it on. So it's great, and I'm very honored to contribute to it. If people find it enjoyable, then I appreciate it. And I try to keep the price low on it too. I could charge more, but because I come out of the punk rock world, it's like, you know what, you don't have to sell your shirts on the table for 20. You can make 10 and still make a profit. So I always appreciate when it's some a band who's just like, we don't have to gouge people.
And to sort of wrap this up a little, one of the running themes of a lot of the episodes is people that got into the hardcore scene early, and just how that's now just it's part of their life, and
we're all grown up. We're all grown up, and we're not snotty little kids anymore.
And
we're snotty old men.
And it's gotten people into just being more creative, or just into what they do in their career, or all comes from that.
But it's doing this podcast is punk rock. It's like it's dope to me to constantly to grow and get older and but not to get lame. To find ways, and I think that people don't get enough credit to being in the punk world and in the hardcore world. That what it really creates in you is wanting to do something different, wanting to do something that makes a difference, and that engages people, and is not a one-way conversation. I mean, hardcore and punk were never a one-way thing. It was always two ways. And I think that a lot of people who came out of that scene, like both of us, want to find ways to have conversations and not just yell at people and engage.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's how I like doing this podcast. It's an excuse.
You do an amazing job. It's great, and the stuff you talk about is important, and the people you talk with are unique. So I appreciate being on.
Cool. Thanks for doing this, man.
It's my honor.
Awesome.
Thank you.